For this recipe, I'm going to need about 3 pounds of boneless center cut pork loin, and I'm just taking as much of the fat off as I can, and then I'm going to cut this into strips, and then again I'm going to cut each strip into about 3 or 4 inch cubes, and that is how I'm going to cook those for this recipe. And after I get those cut, I'm just going to add a tablespoon of brown sugar, 2 teaspoons of paprika, 2 teaspoons of garlic powder, 2 teaspoons of onion powder, 1 teaspoon of pepper, 1 teaspoon of salt, a half a teaspoon of cumin, and 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper. And then I'm going to take that and just mash that up real good and blend it. And this is going to be the dry rub that I use for my pork loin. And so I'm just going to sprinkle that over top of it, and then I'm going to put my hands in there and just kind of work it around to make sure it's good and coated. And then I'm going to place those into a Ziploc bag and set it off to the side so that it can marinate and everything. And I do that for about an hour. While that's marinating, I'm going to go ahead and put together the sauce that I'm going to cook this in. So I'm going to put in 1 cup of barbecue sauce, 1/3 cup of apple cider vinegar, and then a cup of chicken or beef broth. And you can also add a little bit of hot sauce here if you want to. Just stir that up really good. Then I'm going to take my Instapot and I'm going to set it on saute and pour 2 tablespoons of olive oil into there so that I can brown the cubes of pork loin that I have. And I am going to cook each side for about a minute, and so you'll see that I am just going to take my tongs and flip them around until each side is nice and brown. And I had to do this in 2 different sets. So I did the first set, I took it out and put it on a plate, and then I added the second set of pork loin and finished that off. Then I'm just going to take a 1/4 cup of the chicken broth that I had left and put it in there, and it's just going to loosen up all of that cooked on sauteed brown from the pork loin. Then I'm going to add the pork loin back in a little bit at a time, and then I'm going to add the sauce over top of that. And you can see I'm just kind of alternating between the sauce and then adding the pork loin in. I just want to make sure it gets nice and coated and that everything is covered in there. And then once I get that done and get everything put in, I'm going to put the lid on my Instapot, and I am going to set that to cook for about 40 minutes. Once that's done cooking, I just take it out, put it onto a plate and shred it, and you can see how this pork loin is just falling apart. I mean, I really have to do very little to get this to shred. And so I'm just going to go through and do all of that, and then I'm going to take my barbecue sauce that I like and add another cup to that and stir it all up, and that part is done. I'm moving on to the baked beans recipe. I'm just going to cook about 8 pieces of bacon. I did cut those in half, and I am only going to cook those 8 pieces of bacon about half done. Put those onto a paper towel and let that drain, and then the leftover bacon grease that I have in the skillet, I am going to add 1 chopped pepper and about a half of a small onion. And you just want to saute that until it gets all of the drippings and everything from the skillet. Once I get that done, I'm going to go ahead and make the sauce that I'm going to put into my baked beans, and that does call for 1 cup of barbecue sauce, 1/2 cup of brown sugar, and I'm just using a 1/4 cup, so I'm having to do that twice, 1/4 cup of apple cider vinegar, and then 2 teaspoons of dry mustard or 2 tablespoons of Dijon mustard. I didn't have Dijon, so I did have to use regular yellow mustard, but it still is okay. And you just want to stir that up real good and set that off to the side. Now what I'm doing is I'm taking 3 cans of pork and beans, and I'm going to add those to my skillet with my peppers and onions that I just sauteed, and I'm just going to mix that up real good, and then I'm going to add my sauce into that. Stir it real good again, and then I'm going to let that simmer for about 10 minutes before I transfer it to my 9x13 casserole dish. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pour that in there and get that spread out really nice and even, and then I'm going to top it off with the bacon that I cooked, and I'm just going to layer that just so that it covers the top. Once you get all of your bacon put on the way you want it, you will bake that at 325 for 2 hours. And just be careful, do not overbake this because it will dry out your beans. While that's cooking, I'm going to go ahead and start my hush puppy mix, and I'm going to add 3/4 cup of self-rising flour, 1 cup of self-rising cornmeal, and I'm going to stir that together, and then I'm going to add 1 egg that's slightly beaten. I'm going to add a pinch of garlic powder, a pinch of onion powder, a pinch of Old Bay seasoning, and then 1 tablespoon of sugar and 1 cup of buttermilk. And then I'm going to get that nice and mixed up. And now right here, if you want to, you can add chopped onion. I did add some of that later so that I could cook half with and half without. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to heat your canola oil up, and you want that to get to about 375 degrees before you start dropping your hush puppy mix into your oil, so that you get a good consistency. It doesn't take long for these to cook. As soon as you drop them and they start to float, then you're going to want to immediately flip those over so that the other side gets brown. And then once the other side is in there for about 5 to 10 seconds, then you can go ahead and pull those out of the oil and start a new batch. And I did several batches of these. These are better fresh. If you do want to save them, put them in a brown paper bag. Now what I did, this was for 4th of July, so I just went ahead and fixed everybody a plate. I felt like it would be easier to transport that way, and so I just gave everybody some barbecue, some hush puppies, and the baked beans, and then I added corn to that. I did not put the corn, how I did the corn in this video, just because corn is pretty much self-explanatory, but I covered it with tinfoil. And then I wrapped the corn up with tinfoil as well, and I did put some slivers of butter in there so that the corn would already have butter on it, and then transported that to my parents' house, and that is what we had for our 4th of July dinner. I hope you enjoyed watching today's video and it gave you some inspiration on what you might want to put together for your next family get-together.